Hello, this is our Rats with Team 4545 League analyzing the game between Helio Araujo and Lakabaxi. This was played in team event number 53 in the 5th round. So let's have a look. Okay, many transpositional possibilities we could go into here. We could go into a Gruenfeld. Well, not really a Gruenfeld. The bishop's on g2, but many forms of the English, including the symmetrical. And this is an interesting choice. It indicates that White is going to slow play this, and the opening he uses, we'll get to in a moment, is one I'm quite familiar with. But viable was d4. Then we're in a King's Indian type formation. Actually, we would be in a mainline King's Indian. Okay. Now, I think Bishop g5 is just a little bit premature here for what White is doing, and I'll explain it when we get there. Better to leave that bishop back. Okay, now it goes back to d2. And we'll consider this in just a moment when you see White's next move. Okay, here it is, e4. This is what's known as the Botvinnik formation. It's something that, with the pawn chain of c4, d3, and e4. You can also employ it with black in a number of positions. And the one glaring flaw with it is the hole on d4 that's created. But in this position, black's not really primed to exploit it. More so in a symmetrical English when this pawn is on c5, because what black will do is employ a maneuver of knight to e8, to c7, to e6, and then one of the knights hops into d4, depending. Okay, so that's just basically the idea, and we'll come back to why I think the bishop move was just a little bit premature. Okay. And here's the reason why, because now the pawn is under attack on d3. Now, White has ample resources, but it just kind of discombobulates him for a little bit. He has to get refocused here on what the White aim is, and I'll come back to that. But let's just go back to the point where he played bishop g5. Let's just go ahead and do this right away. Now, what I like to call it a variation is fantasy chess. I'm just playing a variation just because I have to spend moves for black in order to show what White wants to do. Okay, and then the knight goes to e2, and like I say, I'll just make developing moves for black, and we'll go about our way. Now let's see. Let's just put the bishop on d7. Now I want to talk about the White idea. Usually what White aims for at some point is he wants to get f4 in, and the idea is to play f5 at some point. And there have been a number of games I've played with this where actually I got this ridiculously easy attack rolling this exact way. And when White has, let's just give you an example what the position looks like. We'll continue to play fantasy chess. Let's just suppose we're just throwing some moves out. Okay, and rook here, and then h3, and then b5. Now maybe White plays b3, and perhaps rook e8. But essentially, White gets this pawn chain up, all his pawns on the White squares, and it's kind of hard to see how you're going to stop those pawns from just going right down the board and wrecking some havoc. So, for instance, if h6, you can play knight g3, and then you want to follow up with h4 and g5 and f6, and White just has this ridiculously easy game to play. Okay, this is just one of the objectives of the type of formation you want to get out of the Botvinnik formation. That doesn't mean you're going to get it all the time. I certainly didn't. If I did, everybody would know, and everybody would be playing this, and if White was always getting crushing games, everyone wouldn't be playing this. Chess isn't that simple. But it is an opening that can lead to some really nice attacking positions for White. And just on the grounds of pure positional play, we gave up one weakness. We gave up the hole on d4. But in counterplay, we get this really nice kingside attack. Okay, so let's just go back to where we were and illustrate why I think bishop g5 was an error. Now White's okay. The game is still even. It's really not a major concern that that this happened, but it's going to take quite a little while to get re-coordinated with what his aim here is in this position. And often, I'll just didn't illustrate it, I want to show it one time. Often what white will do, and I'll just show it with fantasy chess, from this position, I think it's easier than trying to go back and show you. I'll just play some moves. White will play h3 so that the bishop can go to e3. And then, in some cases, if white doesn't want to play h3, and there are some drawbacks, it takes away h3 as a potential square for the bishop. I've discovered this in my live games that I've been playing and posting, using a similar setup of the King's Indian attack. Bishop to h3 was a useful move, and if I play, and at some point, if I do it to get the bishop out so that I get my queen side developed, I can't utilize bishop h3. But the objective here is that you then also maybe, let's just go a little further. Well, actually, I want to do it without h3. Okay, king h1, bishop here. Okay, now f4, and let me just put the rook here. The objective here is you're delaying h3. You just want to show this pattern. You play it this way so that you allow knight g4, and when that happens, you just drop the bishop back to g1. This is what I was going to say. That's an alternative to playing bishop e3. So this is why I think bishop g5 was not the right move. It belongs on e3 at some point, either after an h3 or using this idea. Okay? That's the point I was trying to make. Okay, we got it said. Now we can move on. All right. Now, white needs to activate his queen, so he's got to get rid of that annoying knight. So this is perfectly logical. Okay. Now, well, I can't find any fault with stopping to grab some space on the queen side. Objectively, white wants to attack on the king side, but it's good to do this because what in effect this does is it says I'm going to see if I can't get any counterplay on the queen side first, because for the moment I'm not really coordinated to go forward with my plan, although white could play f4 now. So there's not a bad move. There's an alternative set of plans, but it comes at a price, and the price is that now black is ready to play f5. So let's just go back a second and reevaluate this. Suppose white had played f4 right away. Well, there is a queen check, which may or may not be good. Let's take a look. Okay, now the knight can come into to g4. Now that's kind of a problem. How does white secure f2? The threat is there really a threat? Okay, let's suppose we play h3. Okay, now the knight can go to e3, and if it does, white needs to move his rook, I suppose, right? And if black takes it, well, isn't that kind of helping white a little bit? White's got rid of his bad minor piece. Okay, that bishop really wasn't. Ooh, wait, we've got a problem here. I can't see one movers. But I'm wondering, maybe we could have done that a little differently. When he goes into e3, let's stay on the f file. Although it's a little shaky, you got to watch for tricks on that. It's great if he plays knight takes g2, but what if he plays something like knight takes c4? That's why you have to analyze your candidate moves and check them all out. But the price was that I guess some of this is from maneuvering that white actually did. See, black is able to get in what he wants to do in this position, and that is play f5 to counter. And now black is ready to do it. So now white lines up, he's got the queen free of guarding b2, so he lines up a little shot on the h6 square, and black handles that. Now rook b1 was necessary simply because the pawn was loose, although an alternative might have been to play b5, but that might not be a good idea. Do you see why? Why wouldn't you play b5? Stop the video. Ask yourself. Okay, obviously it attacks the knight, which is kind of out of play. Why just tell it to go to a better square? Okay, okay, so it's going to come into c5, and there's that problem on d3 again. We've got to stop and deal with that. Okay, not to mention the fact it's now closer to getting to e6, and if need be, d4. Now, yeah, you say black could do that anyway, but you're basically forcing black to do that. You're giving up a half move, telling him, go there, get your knight ready. I want that knight over here where it's going to bother me. Let me beat myself a little harder here. So b5 is not really a good move. If you chose it, you'll see why rook b1 was a better choice. But it kind of seems that the white plan's still a little slow. He's not doing exactly what he needs to be doing, and that was preparing for f4. And son of a gun, look what happens. There's an exchange and then f5. Okay. Now, for the moment, the rook is tied down to guard the pawn, but that's okay. But now black is showing indications that he wants to do what I said white should be doing. Black's aiming for f4, and followed by g4, and his pawns are going to run. Okay, so this gives white some time to react, and this move is actually fine. f4. This comes up in a lot of my games I've played from both sides of the board with this type of pawn formation. I've run into the to this pawn structure where these four pawns, and I'll circle them, where they meet like that, and you have all this tension in the center. And what to do? There's a lot of logical plans what to do. It's black's move first off. So let's consider: does he capture or does he just let things sit? Let's back up a move so I can get rid of the circles and arrows, and we can talk about this position because, like I say, it comes up. Now, if black does nothing, then all of a sudden it'll be white's turn to deal with what to do in the center. So let's just consider for a moment the black captures. Okay, we have two different pawn captures. We'll take them both in turn. Okay, let's try this one first. Okay, now what's white do? Well, first off, notice that this pawn capture has opened up the black bishop. So there's something to be said about playing this move if you're black. Okay, now white needs to take back. Look at the ways he can take. He can take with either two minor pieces or with a pawn. Now, if he takes with a pawn, one of the drawbacks is he's going to be left with either an isolated pawn or hanging pawns. Okay. Now they come at. There's some interesting play here, though. I'm not going to try to evaluate everything out. I'm just going to show you the types of positions that can arise. Now suddenly this white piece that was not active suddenly is active, and if white can attack that knight on g5, it's attacked because the defender is pinned. And who was it that said the defensive power of a pinned piece is purely imaginary? Well, that's quite true here. Well, white's not ready to do it with his queen. Obviously, we'd like to go there and snatch it with the queen, but white can be doing things to try to improve his position because he's got an isolated pawn by playing knight g3. So if black takes to get rid of his pin piece, then white recaptures with the pawn, and his f4 pawn is no longer isolated. Okay, so that's one of the ideas, and I can't evaluate everything here. This is something for self-study. Sit down with the board, play with the variations, and see what you come up with. So white doesn't have to take with the bishop. He can also take with the pawn. Now, what does that do? Okay, well, now we've got 3 pawn islands. Okay, and I just kind of pointed to them. White has 3 pawn islands. Black has 2. So logically, this is slightly in black's favor. However, there's chess to be played. At some point, but not yet, black might want to rid himself of that isolated pawn or backward pawn by playing d5, but he's certainly not prepared for it now. The black bishop is active. The white bishop isn't. Okay. But there's some potential targets here. Black needs to complete his development. The queen, rook, and queen bishop are still sitting at home. Where's he going to put them? He can put one on e6 right now, and that attacks a pawn and causes white to have to figure out how to guard it. What's he going to do? Push it? Not necessarily. Maybe knight d1 so that the knight can try and get over back into play. And I guess there's even another candidate move I didn't consider, but it might be risky. Whoops, sorry. Okay, queen b6 check. Okay, the idea is you're eyeballing this, but that might be too risky. You're walking into some pins here. You know, this is a pin piece. What are you going to... now you can guard it here, but now White's getting some nice squares for his pieces. He's got the d5 square. He can even take on this and have an isolated pawn to work on. And, you know, there's clearly a lot going on here, but White is not for worse. You can take, okay, after pawn takes, you can take with the knight. I guess theoretically maybe that might run into the same problem, but maybe not. Maybe there's some differences now. On queen b6, we now have this move, and looks like White's going to keep a pawn on c5 unless Black just retreats his queen. But then White can make an exchange and have the outpost c5. Plop the knight in. Well, you got to watch out for this square. You may be dropping a pawn. Like I said, there's a lot to this. And one other. But then we've just evaluated this pawn taking. Now what about this pawn taking? Okay. And if he does this, then how does White want to recapture? Well, we could take with the pawn and be willing to play with hanging pawns and utilize some of the other motives. Logically, what we'd probably want to do is take with the knight. Again, you have to evaluate whether queen b6 check is worth it trying to snatch this pawn or not. But at the moment, for the moment, Black needs to do something about this knight, or he's going to have some double pawns and kind of wreck his position, so he might be forced to take. And this game looks kind of even, but again, maybe Black's got a little pressure here. G5, forcing the bishop back. You know, it's a game. We might want to go to E3 just to although F4 could be tempting at some point. Not yet. Maybe now. I don't know. But there's a lot to be had, and so we've kind of examined all the possible pawn captures. Then the other alternative is Black doesn't do anything, and suddenly it's now White's turn to consider all these captures. And so generally speaking, it's in that last variation when Black was taking on E4. One good thing about it is that if White takes with a knight, the knight is nicely posted, and Black is not set up this way if White takes on E5. But now it's our turn, and I'll look and see what White can do. White now has two different pawn captures of his own, or he can keep the tension in the center and ignore it. So first, let's show you what he played. He played H3, but let's just stop him for a moment and evaluate the pawn captures. Okay, this one looks kind of easy because it pretty much forces Black to take here as knight's loose, right? Now that immediately puts a backward pawn on the open file, but that's something that can be dealt with, I believe. But then again, maybe not. Queen c2. Well, queen check. You have c5. Let's see. But you know, Black can go about his business and try to redeploy the knight. You know, it's interesting. White's okay here. He's stopping the Black attempted attack because Black's going to drop a pawn if he pushes there, and White's not any worse off. So it's not any great advantage. The game is even, especially with Black's development still not completed. So that would have been a reasonable alternative. But let's look at the others. Okay, so we didn't examine this move. Now, what this does is, one reason I wouldn't recommend it is just telling Black, let's develop your bishop, and while you're at it, attack my pawn. Now, White's got to deal with that. Well, there's ways to deal with that, too. We can go back to queen c2, but I kind of want to steer away from that. I want to head more for a knight e4 motive here. The point being, if Black takes with the knight, we're tempted to take with the pawn here. The point being, we get an immediate tempo on the bishop, okay? Now the bishop's got to redeploy, so let's put it here where it attacks something. And we have to be careful where we go from here. If we go to c3, we may run into this thing again, may rear its ugly head. We can guard it. We can play rook f2. We can play queen e1. I wouldn't necessarily want to play into a pin, but there's plenty of chess here. So, but h3 that he played, it's not a bad move. The game is still relatively even after h3. And now all the questions again is, should black take in the center or not, or keep the tension alive? They're back, and we've already covered them. So the only difference now is that black's not going to get a knight g4 in. So let's see what he does. He plays bishop e6, finally developing that piece. And now again the same questions come back. Should white be doing anything with his possible exchanges? And you can sit and play with those yourself, using some of the ideas I did, and go on. But instead he plays king h2, and once again the tension is still there. A lot of the same themes and motives still exist. It's just a question of when someone's going to finally break in the center and make an exchange. And now white goes about employing a maneuver that I was talking about, knight e1. It can go to e3 where it pressures f5. It could go to f2, which could help secure g4. The knight on e3 does it as well, but on f2 it also wants to jump back into e4, but could have gone there directly if it stayed on c3. So e3 is probably the better and more logical square. But the game is still relatively even. Now the knight goes back to h5, and all those pawn captures are still there. When is it going to happen? Now he goes to f2. Now I was saying I thought maybe e3 is a little better. They're probably not much different. But again, it's, well, the only difference is we're not on f4 anymore. Let's suppose we have some exchanges on f4, okay? And we're going to take with the rook in this case so we don't get the double pawns. There's a tempo on the rook. Well, there could have been a tempo on the bishop too. We're going to go back here. Maybe he can play f4 now. And now there's a tempo on the knight, which wouldn't be. Anyway, let's just revert. It's interesting. So knight f2 is not a bad move, and knight c7. Now the only drawback with that is it's not getting to e6 where I'd like to be because this bishop's in the way, and the tension still exists. And finally, it's gone. Okay, good. So, but there's been some changes in this position now, and the basic change from when this first occurred was the defense of the square g3. G3 used to be defended by a pawn. It's no longer defended by a pawn. It's defended by a king. And so this is kind of activating the black pieces. What were the alternatives? Black was in no hurry to break the tension, so maybe white shouldn't have. What could he have done differently? Well, he could have, aside from leaving the tension there, he could have, maybe now time was to put this knight on c3, and then eyeball getting a knight into e4. Okay, see, maybe that's an idea. Let white play with that on his own time. Let's just look at it again. The point is, if black decides to take here, which he certainly wasn't indicating he wanted to take anywhere, white gets to put a knight in on e4, right? Excuse me. Okay, so there's certainly plenty of variations here, and they're both taking their time, which is good. They're close to time pressure, but not quite there. Time pressure is when you're probably down under 5 minutes. Serious time pressure is when you're playing with nothing but your increment. Okay, so now, oh, he didn't take with the bishop. Wow. Well, maybe there was a reason he didn't. My first inkling is to take with the bishop. It just seems like the natural move. What does white do? Well, he could play d4 and chase the bishop out. He could play knight f4, and if he plays knight f4, basically he's inviting exchanges. Let's see what happens if we do some exchanges. Okay, now some wood has come off the board, and black has a discovery, but it looks like white has a resource. Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure the game was even at this point, and it was certainly looked even in the line I just showed. But this keeps the imbalance alive. One one advantage of it is that it does preserve the option of black playing f5 or f4 or pawn to king bishop 5 if you understand English descriptive notation. One advantage of English descriptive notation is that one move is the same for both sides. If I say both sides are aiming for pawn to king bishop 5, you know what I'm talking about. If I say in algebraic notation, we used to have to separate the colors. White is playing for f5, black is playing for f4. But instead you could say both sides are playing for pawn to king bishop 5. Alright, anyway. But again, we discussed that this way back at the outset, that if there was an exchange, one of the options was taking back with a pawn, and it's something that black could have been doing way back when. So anyway, let's see what white does. Okay, bishop e3. Not saying it's a bad move. One idea of it is it threatens to put the bishop on c5. Yeah, that looks good. But I think, though, the problem, white's going to kind of run into a problem here in a minute. I'm not sure that was the move yet. No, it wasn't. So it's a fine move. The alternative was maybe to say, I think everything here is even. Let's play on the queen side. Let's go ahead with b5. Maybe now was the time to finally break with that, since white has not been granted his opportunity to play for the f5 break. Maybe it's now time to try this. Open up some lines on the queen side. If black does nothing, white may be taking on c6 and sticking a rook on the 7th rank, and if black takes on b5, white will take, and the queen is tied. The black queen is tied down to guarding the knight on c7. So maybe that was the time, but I don't think there's anything wrong with bishop e3. Okay, now comes f4. So now we have finally the fundamental thing, and it looks like maybe white, at first glance, white's winning an exchange, but black has a resource that he planned. And let's see, take a look at the times. Black spent a good close to 3 minutes on the move, so that's good. He worked the basics out, and then white took over a minute on this move. Wanted to make sure he wasn't missing anything. So both sides are using good clock management. Now black's next move. Let's see what time he takes. He took close to 4 minutes on that one, so maybe he hadn't worked it all out. And this is now the critical juncture of the game. If you're in this game with white, and if you look at the clock, you have 11 minutes and 33 seconds. You do get a 45-second increment added every time you move, but black only has 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and that's kind of key. So the first thing we want to look at is we have to ask ourselves what to do. Black has offered an exchange, so the first question is, do we dare to try to take it? Okay, and it gets complicated. Okay, bishop takes. Black has this check, and if white does nothing, moving the king might be silly, because you're just going to run into some potential attacks here. You're going to, if anything, you can just take the bishop and keep the attack alive. You could take the knight down here, and that's a nuisance pawn on the 7th rank. It's covering a couple of squares that white needs to worry about. I don't know the players can evaluate this. But it just seems, if anything, it just seems risky going into this line. It just seems like black is going to have a too good of an attack here, and he's only given up an exchange for it. What were the other candidate moves? I don't think taking with a pawn is just good at all. It's just driving this knight into a better square with new threats. Okay, so for instance, if you take here, if black takes with a knight, look, there's a mate threat. Ouch. So you deal with that, and then now there's new threats. Queen check, and then you're going to get f3 in, and white's really in trouble here. So, but unfortunately, let's see, I'll show you what he did play. He played king h1, and unfortunately that's a mistake. It just gets him in a bad way. White had a resource, but let's look at the clock one time. He spent a good amount of time on it, which is wise. He just didn't see enough here. The way to stop the black attack in it, to run it down to a screeching halt, is to play g4. Okay. If he plays g4, black's, like I was saying, black's attack is kind of out. Okay. Again, you can't get away with bishop takes g4 here, try to sack, because it's guarded too well. All right. And black can slow play it and save his rook, but then white just kind of blockades the position and plays bishop f3. Okay. And what bishop f3 does is it basically says, I've got a blockade and you're not going to break it. And black looks at this and says, what do I do? And he's got a knight that now maybe it's under attack. Maybe white can get away with taking it. And if it goes to g3, what's the follow-up? Suppose white does nothing, just battens down the hatches a little bit, so to speak. Suppose we play queen c2. Queen c2 says, I'm covering the 7th rank, and if you take my knight, I'm going to take back with my queen. And where's your attack? Now, this has given black a protected pass pawn, but there's no guarantee he's going to... that pawn's not going to be eventually lost. At some point, white will be trying to break with d4 and generate some counterplay on it, and black will have to retreat his queen and try for g5. And even then, even if it's protected pass pawn, that's no guarantee that it's going to win. So maybe in some respects we look at it and say, no, under no circumstances can I allow my opponent to have a protected pass pawn. And I will not. But sometimes you have to go beyond what you think you want to do and do something just out of necessity. Because let's just go back and see what are black's alternatives. Well, his only other alternative I could see is f3, and maybe white got lost in the complications. But one nice thing about this position is that white gets the queens off. If you're being attacked. If you can get the queens off, chances are, or let me rephrase that, your chances just got a lot better. Now black has to stop and take that queen. He doesn't have a Zwischenzug that's useful. He can take on e2, but white just saves his queen, and black doesn't get enough material, right? Okay, so black's got to stop and take this. Now, white's got a lot of reasonable moves here. He could take the pawn on f3 with his bishop. I suppose he could do that, but I think what's just fine is to take here. Now, how's black going to proceed? He has his choice of minor pieces. Which one you want to take? If you take the bishop, you're taking a bad piece, and you're driving the king closer, because that'll come in eventually. If you take with you've got to take with the pawn. I mean, yeah, you've got to take the knight. But then white gets this Zwischenzug. Hey, check. And then white saves his rook, and fortunately, f2 is covered. And I do believe that pawn on e2 falls. I don't know how black is going to save it. Well, let's see. You could play rook a2, I guess. But I think it's doomed in the long run. And let's see. White can still go back to some of my ideas of b5, and he could even play king g3 with the idea of bishop f3, and surround and win that pawn. So, but even so, even with the pawn on there, material is even. If white wins that pawn, he's a pawn ahead and can play this for a win. So, going back the key position, g4 was the move, and I'm sure black can find ways to get some activity going without making the queen exchange. Like I say, he can let white play the blockade. We can try that strategy. See, what was I saying? Knight g3, and invite some complications to get the king. Well, now it's not going to work. Oh yeah, it is. Or is it? Let's see. Knight takes. You get this with check, so black can avoid the queen exchange. But does he have enough here? He may not be able to. He may have to trade queens here to save his rook. So what's black going to do here? He's got some loose stuff. I think he might have to play f3, and then white should be okay. As I explained, he gets the queens off. Okay, so let's see what happened. Okay, so king h1, I think it was just wrong, unfortunately. Now black saves the rook, and he's still got this dominating position. And I guess the one problem with g4 isn't as clear cut as it was before, because there's some differences here. Knight to g3 is now a check. Is it worth it though? Let's see. Okay, now we can go ahead and trade our queens that we wanted, and then White's got to deal with this guy, right? Where's he going to put it? Wow. Every square's gone but one. Got to go here, and let's see. There's this pawn that's a little thorn in the white side. Can black keep it? Maybe. Let's see. Maybe not. Suppose we double our rooks. Oops, can't double the rooks. There's a bishop on that square. As I said, I can't see one movers. But at any rate, it's an interesting position. Maybe white can still survive. G4 seemed to work before. It may work in this position too. Okay, let's go back to the game. Okay, so I think this just asking for it. It's just driving black's pieces to better squares. How much time did he spend on it? Oh, nearly 2 minutes. Minute and 45 seconds. Anyway, but now black's got this. Now he's got that pass pawn anyway. I was talking earlier. Maybe white didn't want to allow it. Well, now the way it's gone, well, black's got the pass pawn, and the only difference is suddenly this guy is active because e5 is no longer occupied, and that piece is going to come into play here in a minute or two. So now he tries the blockade, which I mentioned, stop f3. But black just has some good moves. He comes over here, and now he's attacking h3. The threat is bishop takes, followed by bishop takes here with discovered check. White's got to deal with that. So now the king comes back, and white spent 2 moves moving his king, and look at the change in the black position. Now the knight comes in here because now taking on g3 will allow the queen to take on g3 with check. So white tries this, trying to secure g3 a little bit better, but there's some problems. Here's one of them where it comes into the 7th rank. I guess he could almost even play. No, he can't. Oh yeah, he can. What's wrong with knight takes knight? Oh, this bishop guards this knight. Okay, never mind. I can't see one movers. They're beyond me. All right. Long range plans down to the ending. Yeah, fine. I'll give you a roadmap. One movers? Nope. I suck. I guess that's my allure, huh? The fact I can't see one movers. Okay. But now the rook comes down. Now what does white do? Now there's a threat to win a piece, and then nothing is guarding this guy. Oh yeah, he is. I just said it. See, I forget. I missed one mover and I missed it again. So did white have anything better than that? Wow. Let's see. Knight takes just allows pawn takes, and let's see. Knight takes. What's black going to do here? I guess he takes with the pawn and take with the rook. I don't know. What am I saying? Oh yeah. Then the bishop comes into d5 or e5. Ouch. I think something like this happened in the game. Okay, so he took there. It really doesn't matter because it's coming. Bishop is coming there anyway. And this is disaster. Now the bishop's forking a couple things, and it's also got a subtle threat. Remember what I said earlier when the knight was on h5 and I had that bishop on e4? I said the defensive power of a pin piece is purely imaginary. Well, see that rook? He's pinned. See that knight? He's pinned. Right? They're both pinned. What's guarding h3? What's attacking h3? Couple guys. So, and what's defending g3? We know it's defending f2. I keep missing it. But what's defending g3? Nothing. So white sends the defender over. Right? Well, once again, the defensive power of a pin piece is purely imaginary, so black to play and do the best he can. Pause the video. Okay, did you find it? Here it is. I'll show you. That's checkmate. Very, very nice checkmate. This, to me, was a very, very well played game. Just a few tiny little errors. Even though I would have played differently with my plan, according to the opening, the way the game went, white did adapt to them, and he did find reasonable moves. Very, very well played. It's just that near the end, when we got a little less time, there was just a few smaller mistakes. He missed G4, but sometimes that happens. You look at the tactics and you see something that's not really there. Unless White tells us, we don't know what he was thinking. We can only guess. And I thoroughly enjoyed making this video. It's probably the longest one I have for Team 45. And as long as I figure as long as there's something to say, I'm going to say it. And I want to thank everyone for their time. I hope you learned something from this game. And I got to get ready to make another video. All right, take care.